Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. This is Season 2, Episode 14. Today, I have the pleasure of talking to one of my fellow writers on Medium, Patricia Joseph. She is a wonderful writer and someone who I've read many of her articles. I first discovered her when she wrote about her potato salad article that was very popular on Medium, and from then on I became a fan, and I just thought I'd reach out and see if she was eager to be on the show at all, and she was. So I was really happy to have her on the show. And I'm so grateful that she accepted because I had a wonderful conversation with her. And although I just finished talking to her, I would love to have her back on again and get a chance to talk to her more. So I hope she'll be on the show again. Without further ado, we'll go right to the interview, and on we go. Welcome to the Well-Seasoned Librarian podcast. Today I'm speaking with writer Patricia Joseph. Patricia, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Dean. I really appreciate the invitation.
A pleasure to have you. I really love getting to read what you've written on Medium and other forums. For our listeners, though, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, I'm a wife and a mother of 4 millennials. I'm also a real estate agent with EXP Realty. And I'm also a health communications specialist with a well-renowned public health agency, but I won't mention that name.
Okay. That's pretty impressive. You like me have a lot of kids, millennials, so they keep us on our toes.
Yes, they do.
How did you come to writing?
Well, I've always been creative. I mean, I remember as a little girl, I would make my own greeting cards.
Me too.
And yeah, and so I mean, it was just natural progression. I never intended to actually be a writer. I just sort of went with my passions. But I decided to, after, my children were, older, and I was able, to have a little time back to myself, I decided to go back to school later on in life and finish my degree. And I got a degree in health journalism from UMass. And I just really enjoyed all the assignments, the writing assignments. One of my professors, I remember he had wrote on one of my papers, he said, "Oh, you're such a great storyteller," which I never considered myself as such. But that sort of like always stuck with me. And with one of my business ventures, I decided to start a blog. Initially, it was a healthy food blog. But when I became a real estate agent, I wanted a way to be able to provide information about real estate, as well as incorporate my passions for, food and healthy living. And that resulted in a blog, a lifestyle blog that I have now.
I want to ask you, as somebody who has been a food journalist, or not food journalist, sorry, health journalist, how do you feel about all the stuff that's out on the internet that's not real journalism because there's a lot of pseudoscience on the internet and a lot of people that I think mean well, but just blunder through and they're not really journalists. How do you feel about all that being out there as well?
Well, I mean, it's kind of scary. I mean, because most people, they do take that information as credible news. And my advice is to always look to credible sources for that type of information when it relates to making health decisions for you and your family.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a cacophony of voices out there, and it's really confusing sometimes when you look up specific articles. As a librarian, I try and urge people to look through vetted resources and not just like, just somebody who's, that has no authority just talking, I mean, even when I write about recipes, I'm always quick to hasten to add that I'm not a chef. I'm not a professional. I'm just writing this, But yeah, I think it's tough for people to kind of sift through everything and find the real journalism out there, but it is out there.
Yeah, it really is. And I myself, I generally rely on information, especially when it comes to health. First is CDC,
Right.
but then CNN or the New York Times. I mean, those are credible sources that I tend to rely on for that type of information.
Yeah. Now, you've been on Medium for a while, and you're one of the many writers that I read on there regularly. I always look forward to your articles. What's been your experience with writing on Medium?
Um, it's been interesting, I'll say. I sort of stumbled upon it as a reader, actually. I was like, wow, this is a really interesting platform. I enjoyed the many articles that I read. So I decided, to actually become a paid member, especially when I started reading so much. And then you get that message that says, oh, you've reached your limit.
Right.
uh,
I had that
so I
too.
was like, yeah. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? $5, it's worth it. And so when at that time, I did not realize that Medium paid its writers.
Yeah.
And so when I discovered that, I was like, okay, well, that's really interesting. Let me, give it a try. And so, the initial start was somewhat sort of shocking to me, I guess, because the readership, I guess I sort of expected for my readership to be greater than it was at that time. I was like, oh, well, maybe I'm not as good a writer as I think I am, but it's not really that. And so, I just sort of decided that, okay, you know what, I'm not really going to worry about how many people read my articles or how much money I make. It's really all about me just having a voice. And so, even though in at the beginning, just thinking about, oh, I could get paid, for writing this article, I just don't even think about that anymore. I just think about, this is a platform that gives me a voice. And so, I'm not one of your regular writers where I'm cranking out 5 to 10 articles a week, because my lifestyle just you know can't handle that.
Right.
But I'm a writer that I'm very connected to my emotions.
Right.
And so even in on my profile, I say I write about those moments that move me, uh, which is what I do. And so, I have books, I have papers with list of article and story ideas. I have, a notes on my phone of story ideas. Some I've completed, some I haven't. But when I'm moved and I get that moment that propels me to write, then I write.
Well, that brings on another question, because I wanted to find out about you, because a lot of people on Medium are like one trick ponies. They write about one thing, like they write about politics, or they write about sports or movies, but they don't really branch out and stuff. But you're all over the place. You write about food, racial issues, daily practices. What inspires you to write?
My life. I mean, that's what I use as inspiration. It's my life. I mean, I write about those things that I'm passionate about. And number one, it is food. It is racial equality. It's uh, healthy living. And I remember reading. I had signed up for a newsletter for Neiman Storyboard.
Hmm.
Have you heard of that?
I don't think so.
Okay. Oh, absolutely. A wonderful newsletter. I mean, they really give great advice. It's actually geared to writers. And I remember reading one of the stories in there, And the advice was to mine, M-I-N-E, mine your life.
Yeah, I like
And
that.
I was like, yeah, because if nothing else, I do know about my own life.
Yeah,
And so it's just a matter of taking those things in your life and connecting them to a bigger picture
I like that.
so that others can relate to that. And so I do try to uh, use that advice when I'm writing my articles.
Yeah, I think it's funny too, because I think you mentioned earlier that like you could write for a long time and not really get many hits. And then suddenly one day you got like 50 hits. And it's weird because I think a lot of it is the fact that we're on a platform that's on a algorithm. And if people click one thing, then suddenly they're seeing all that stuff. Like I can never really feel like I can control what articles I'm getting. I have my
Hmm.
favorites that I click and I can see those, but I think there's a lot of clickbait that gets put out there
Oh
and a
yeah,
lot of stuff that's like very controversial because that gets all
yeah,
the hits. So
yeah, and I can't honestly. I just don't have the the brain power to actually, do that. The clickbait, and I just want to put out good content.
yeah,
I just want to put me, I guess, on a page and hopes that others can relate to it. I always try to at least make sure that what I'm writing, it's valuable to someone else. And it's interesting that you mentioned about you just never know about what kind of views or clicks
yeah,
you're going to get on any of your articles. Like the one of the recent articles I wrote about the pioneer woman and the potato salad. It's
yeah.
gotten like 1,400 views, which I was like, wow. I mean, I never would have imagined that many people viewing that article. And I think maybe about 400 people so far have read it, which is great. And honestly, even if one person read it, I'm honored, because that means that they took time out of their day and read my words, and they thought that they were important enough to take that time. And I do appreciate that. So that's how I try to approach my writing.
I think the potato salad article is the first time I read you, and I think that's what got me into your work. But it is strange because like I've had times where I've written like 20 articles in a month and gotten like $5, and then I'll write nothing and I'll get $50. And I'm like, this is crazy.
I
It
know
makes
it
no
is.
sense.
It makes absolutely no sense. And so I mean, I'm just along for the ride, I guess you can say,
Me too.
and just the opportunity to be able to express myself. I think that one nice thing about Medium is that you can find a tribe. You can
Yeah,
find your tribe.
absolutely.
Your writing may not appeal to everyone, and that's okay.
Yeah,
There's
I totally
nothing
agree.
wrong with that. But if you can connect with those who feel the same way that you do, and I got a lot of responses on that one article about the potato salad.
Oh yeah.
I didn't realize that so many people were that passionate as I am about potato salad, but they are.
Oh yeah.
It's one of those things that either your mom or somebody in your family makes the best potato salad. So those were the type of responses that I got. Like, oh yeah, well, my mom, she does this, and
I think
but
we've all had that bad potato salad moment where you've gone to like a potluck or somebody's house and
uh,
you put a forkful of it in your mouth and you have stop, and your brain says absolutely not.
I know, because I mean, you had made a comment about that, and I was like, "Oh my God!" I just not could not even imagine. I mean, that is just one of those sacred dishes in my family,
Me
and
too.
so
Yeah.
we actually really do judge people by the type of potato salad that they make.
I had a friend who made potato salad, and I would go visit her, and she'd have me over for dinner every once in a while. And whenever I'd leave, I would very sheepishly say, could you let me have a container of potato salad to take home? And I would never do that with anything else, but it was so good that I was
Mm,
like, okay, I've got to do this.
hmm.
Now you are a real estate agent, as you mentioned, and you write about it a bit in your blog, Real Home Matters. Can you tell us
Hmm.
a bit about your work as a real estate agent and your blog, Real Home Matters?
Okay. Well, I mean, basically, it's, helping buyers and sellers in their real estate goals. And so, but my blog gives me a platform where I can reach more people and provide information about, whether you're buying or selling a home, other things related, to a home. How do you fix it up? How do you find contractors? So I just go through, all aspects of actually buying or owning a home.
Now, you've written many impressive articles, but because we're largely a food related program, I mean, this podcast mainly, I want to touch on one that I really thought was poignant, especially because I see its sentiments echoed all over social media. The idea behind the article discussed food insecurity and how much food writing seems to be devoid of the fact that many Americans are food insecure, which I wholeheartedly agree with, and that's a big issue with me too. Can we talk about that for a bit?
Yeah. So when I wrote that article about food insecurity, actually, I wrote it from the perspective of my own background, because I grew up poor. I grew up in the housing projects of Washington, D.C. My mom, she was widowed when I was 3. Actually, my dad died when I was 3, and so she had to raise 5 children alone. And I saw her, struggle in trying to, put food on the table. She did have public assistance, and I do remember that because she would have me, to go and pick up the packages. I don't know if anyone remembers this. At that time, they would, give you the foods, like, in this like brown, wrapped in like brown paper, the blocks of cheese and, the powdered milk. And so I grew up, on that. And that really actually is what keeps me grounded. And so I do empathize with anyone who has to struggle with not having enough food. And to me, I just can't imagine that, being in a country as rich as America is, and there are people who don't have enough to eat. And I
Yeah.
and I just I don't understand that. I mean, we're not a third world country, and so I just really, wish, and especially with COVID hitting, and we seeing that most Americans who were, low income, they were really impacted. Not, the growing food lines. I mean, that's, I just, I don't get it. I just really don't get it, why there are not enough resources for, people, to have, the food that they need.
It's crazy because I've seen so much food waste where produce has been wasted. I remember when I was in high school, we were not doing great. My family did not make a lot. And I remember we would go and we would sometimes go, we knew we lived in a farming community, and the farmers would let us sometimes, if we went on after they had gone through with the machines and picked the potatoes, we can go get our own potatoes
Mhm.
because there was always some left over. And it's funny how often and I've talked to farmers and they're frustrated about how much there's food waste with where they can't sell stuff fast enough or they can't get it to market fast enough and stuff just
Mhm.
goes to waste. And I know a woman here in the Bay Area who has a farm that she's gotten where she is able to use the land to raise food for food banks locally and provide to
Mhm.
schools. I
Mm-hmm.
think there are a lot of programs where people are starting to, take notice of things like that, and they're starting to
Mm-hmm.
act, but there's still so much food insecurity. I know that many areas of the Bay Area where I live, if you live somewhere that's a fairly poor demographic, you are not going to live near a grocery store or a farmer's
Mm-hmm.
market or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want food, you got to buy it at the gas station, which
Mm-hmm.
is ridiculous because it's always really expensive.
Oh yeah, and it's unhealthy.
Yeah, yeah, it's never like really
Yeah.
good
So
food.
yeah, yeah. So I mean, you pretty much are when you're living in those areas. I mean, it's a food desert,
Yeah.
pretty much. Um, but I do remember reading an article. I believe it may have been on New York Times, where when COVID first hit, that in many places across the country, uh, there were people who started to put out refrigerators out on sidewalks. Had you seen that?
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, yeah. For anyone to, and it's like, wow, we have really gotten to this point, that people, they don't have food. And
Yeah.
so they have to find it wherever it's available. And so there were people who saw the need for that. And but of course, because of food safety issues, many of them had to stop. But that's another area that's kind of like dear,
Yeah.
close to my heart as well.
Yeah, it's just I'm really passionate, and I think that more people are speaking up about it, but it's something that we really have to still address in this country because the inequality of food availability and good food to young kids that need it, or even adults or older people that need
Mhm.
it, it's just really it's glaring. It's
It
glaring.
is. It is. Also it makes me think about this article that I had read several years ago. It was in the Washington Post, but I actually, saved that article because I was struck by the writer. It was about a small town that was in Texas, but it was near the Mexican border. And in that town, there was an increase in children with type 2 diabetes. And of course, this was an area there were no decent grocery stores, no farmers markets. And many of the children, their breakfast for the day was to go to the corner store and to get a bag of snacks that was similar to like Cheetos. And then they would have like melted cheese over top of the snack. And of course, then it would be a soda pop, and that was their breakfast. And so and the healthcare workers, who were visiting many of these families, to provide them information on resources that they could get, and they found that many of these children had type 2 diabetes, and so they would have to help the mother to give insulin to the child. I mean, but that's you know that's
It's it's something
I
I'm
don't
seeing
know.
so
It leaves me
often.
speechless.
Yeah, I mean, because you could buy soda for cheap, but juice is expensive. And even in
Oh,
many areas, the drinking water is not viable. I mean, let's not even get started on Michigan.
oh, I know, and you know what? That's that. Now you just touched on another topic that I'm very passionate about because, like you said, the unhealthy foods very accessible. I mean, you can get it any place. But the more healthier foods, they come with a large price, and I
Yeah.
just don't understand that. Myself, there are certain foods that I just won't buy. I am not going to spend $8 for a pint of strawberries, organic strawberries. I'm just
No,
not. I
no,
mean, I'm
me
just
either.
not. And it just bothers me that why is it everybody can't have access to healthy foods at a reasonable cost. And they're talking now how, the cost of groceries have really gone up. But then we look at people who have limited resources, they have limited, low income. We look at them, we point the finger and say, oh, okay, well, you should be eating better. Okay, but have you really shown that person how they can eat better on the income that they have when they can go to the fast food place and get, two burgers for $2
Yeah.
when maybe they have $20 for the week? Or I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just crazy.
I mean, I've lived that myself where I've had $5 and I'm like, I can get my son and I, although I think McDonald's is more expensive now, so you can't really do that anymore. But
Mhm.
at the time you could get like, I could get a couple burgers for each of us and that would fill us for the evening. But like, that's really common for a lot of parents.
It is. I mean, it is.
And it
And
is
so,
cheaper.
but yeah. So, it's okay. On one hand, it's okay. I've got, $40, left to, feed a family. And on this hand, okay, I know I can get, what, like I said, 3 meals for, $5. Okay, that leaves me with $35. I mean, I mean, what choices are we giving them? I mean, there are not many choices. It's
Yeah.
either you eat unhealthy and, on the money that you have, or I mean, there's just no other choice.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get it, Dean. That really bothers me. The cost of healthy foods. I myself, I do remember when my husband and I, we first got married and, started our family, and our incomes were not what they are now. And so I had to be, very cautious with the, the groceries and, the money that I spent,
Mhm.
because I knew that, of course, you have to, pay for housing, you got to,
Yeah.
utilities and, gas in the car. It's a lot. And so, even though, I mean, I've been, have pretty much led a vegetarian lifestyle, my whole adult life. I've raised my children like that. And so, and what I learned is that I had to buy the best with what I could afford
Yeah.
at that time. So if that meant that, I had to buy the canned vegetables or the frozen vegetables instead of the fresh produce, that's what I would do. And
Yeah.
then I would just, pour off, the liquid in the cans, and rinse them off, and add in some olive oil, and to try and reduce the sodium. So there were things that I realized that I could do even on my limited income. But
Yeah.
it's not easy. I mean, it's just not easy.
Well, I mean, too, like when you go to places like Whole Foods, they have such an array of vegetables that it's obscene. And, or even like some of the higher level stores. I don't know where you are in the United States as far as I know everybody has different stores, but we have Safeway out here, and Safeway
Okay,
has a
I remember
lot of
Safeway.
vegetables
Mm-hmm.
and a really a wider range. But if you go to Walmart, you have like corn,
Yep.
carrots,
It's limited.
potatoes, that's it. It's not a
Mm-hmm.
lot.
It's not a lot. Mm-mm.
And
Yeah.
it's I see my stepkids grew up. I'm cooking things like kohlrabi. They've never heard of that. I'm
Mm.
making something with rhubarb. They have no idea what rhubarb is.
Mm.
There's all these vegetables and fruits that most kids in
Mm-hmm.
America are not even aware of. And it's a
Not even.
crime because there's not as much farming going on. Farming is big farm. Like I talked to a guy last week who told me that 90% of the wheat in America is grown for McDonald's hamburger buns.
Mm.
90%. Yeah.
Wow.
It's terrifying.
It is terrifying. It is terrifying. And so, and on the flip side, with the unhealthy foods that we eat, the unhealthy diets, of course, that brings on other things
Yeah.
like chronic illnesses,
Right.
chronic diseases, which a lot can be controlled by your diet.
Right.
And I don't know, it's just a catch 22. I mean, it's just, it's baffling. It's really baffling.
I've had a few authors on here that have written cookbooks because they were having chronic illness and they had to change their
Mm,
diet because of it.
mm-hmm.
And I think that we're not really aware as a country how much we're eating ourselves into the hospital.
Yes,
And I
exactly.
include myself in that. You know,
Yeah.
I have, yeah, I'm improving my diet, but I still have
Mm-hmm.
work to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. And I can say too, I mean, I'm not a vegan. I probably never will be, because I grew up on Southern food. But once I became vegetarian, I learned how to make those Southern foods healthier.
Hmm.
And so, but I try to limit like my sodium, my fat intake. Um, and also I pay close attention to moderation.
Yeah.
Like my husband, when I fix his meals, I prepare his foods and put them on just a regular dinner plate, but mine is smaller.
Hmm.
And I do that for a reason, because I don't want to put more on my plate.
Yeah.
Um, and try to use that to help me to moderate and portion control my foods.
Are there any vegetarian authors that you like that you want to recommend to our audience?
I would say one is Bryant Terry. I know that there's a woman that I follow on Instagram. She's actually a vegan, but Tabitha Brown, who just came out with a new book, and I follow her, and I think there are a lot of other authors out there. I mean, it's just that lifestyle now that I think that a lot of people have really found that there are a lot of health benefits to it, with reducing your meat intake, definitely including much more fruits and vegetables. I know for one of my articles that I wrote on Medium, I had referenced Michael Pollan. Eat real food, eat the foods that your grandmothers and your great grandmothers ate. Um, so yeah.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
I remember when I was younger, when we had food celebrities or people that wrote cookbooks, it was always like in the French school, like Julia Child, Graham Kerr, the Galloping Gourmet, what's his name? I can't remember his name, but basically it was largely middle class or upper class white people that all kind of came from the French school of cooking.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that there's been any change over the years in the diversity in food writing, or has there been any improvement, do you think, or is it still pretty much dominated by the European school of cooking?
It has changed. Still pretty much dominated by European cooking. Um, and I really think that we have to, in order, because here in America, we have to recognize that we do have a racial problem.
Yeah.
But I think in that recognition, there are stories to be told. And we have to tell the true stories. We can't just tell one story and ignore another.
Right.
Even if the other story makes us feel a certain way, that doesn't negate the fact that it's still a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
And so that's the issue that I have, is that African Americans who made great contributions to the culinary world are not given the same recognition. As a matter of fact, I was watching a video, and it was about James Hemings, who was the chef for Thomas Jefferson. Of course, he was trained in French cooking,
Right.
but he also was the one who created a dish that most Americans love, and that's macaroni and cheese.
Yeah. Maybe the
And
most
I was
popular
like,
dish in America. I would argue that might be one of the most popular dishes that we have in America.
exactly. But how many people know that? How many
I
people
didn't know
know
it till
that?
you just said it. I actually didn't know that.
How many people know? Honestly, I just learned of that, and I was floored. I was like, oh my goodness. So there are a lot of stories about people of color who have made great contributions, but they are not given the same recognition. And I really think that that's a real grave injustice, not to just African Americans, but all Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I remember growing up seeing people on TV shows, and it would be white cooks cooking soul food
Hmm.
and talking authoritatively about soul food, and I didn't think about it at the time. But recently, when I've heard people talking about things like that, I was like, oh shit, and it really kind of like brings it home to my mind how horrible that was, and how I can't imagine watching something like that and going like, are you kidding me?
Exactly, exactly. I mean, the the perfect definition, cultural appropriation. You're taking something original and presenting those ideas without giving credit to the original owners. That's
Absolutely.
exactly, yeah, that's exactly what it, and it's not right. It's
No.
really not right. So I go back to that article again, about the potato salad. I mean, even though African Americans, we did not actually create that, but we largely had a lot to do with perfecting and putting the flavor and soul into it. And and I've just realized that maybe a part of me being on Medium and having a that platform to which gives me a voice is to make sure that people do know about the history of food and African Americans and how much they have contributed to American cuisine. Just recently, I had watched, and I don't know if you got a chance to, the docu series on Netflix,
Yeah.
High on the Hog.
Yeah, I saw the whole thing. I loved it.
Absolutely wonderful. I mean, actually, the first episode, I will admit that I cried. I mean,
Yeah.
I really I boohooed on that one. But for me, it was very eye opening, but also very educational. And it also made me, I guess, feel very proud too. That I come from a people who have made a lot of contributions to American cuisine in this country.
Yeah.
And that is a lot, to be proud of. And
Yeah, I mean, I think that most people are not aware of it, and I'm glad there's shows like High on the Hog that can kind of point that out. And it was a wonderfully done series. I mean, I thought
very.
the fact that they did it episodically, and they're going to bring more back too, so it's not
Yeah,
over.
I saw that. Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah,
I like that
yeah.
they highlight many authors that talk about the issues too. They had Michael Twitty on there, and I got to see him.
I follow him. Do you follow him?
Yeah, I follow him on Twitter and Instagram.
Yeah,
I read
yeah.
all of his books except for his newest book. I haven't read that one yet on rice, but I've read everything
Okay.
else, and
And you know
he's
what?
somebody to
That was
watch.
interesting that you talked about rice, because I didn't know that about the Gold Coast and rice and how it became so popular here in America, with the slaves that came from the west coast of Africa. That was like really eye-opening for me.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, it's just so I love food history, and for me to read these books, it's just a pleasure. But it also is kind of like it exposes some ugly truths about America
Yeah,
that are, they're hard to take, but they're important to take, I think. So,
yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
um, you mentioned in your articles um, vegetarian cooking, and you've talked about vegetarianism. Now, do you think there's a sea change in food writing on vegetarian topics? Because I'm seeing more and more authors on Medium who are vegetarian
Mm-hmm.
and who are talking about it. And there seems to be a really kind of a resurgence of interest in vegetarian cooking
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
vegan cooking in America. Do you think this is like becoming a big kind of a renaissance right now for it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do. I do. And honestly, I kind of believe that the millennial generation is driving a lot of that,
Yeah.
because they are seen as the generation of social change, and so they want to live their lives with a purpose.
Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of the generation of the 60s. Even though I'm a child of the 60s, but I was, very young then. So I wasn't like of age to go out, and, do protesting. But that was a generation for social change. And I think we are seeing that today.
Absolutely. I mean, it's crazy because we can get food now that tastes just like meat. You really can't tell the difference. And honestly, half the time I probably don't care because if it tastes like meat, that's good enough for me. I don't really have to have meat. So I think a lot of people are starting to really rethink it, like, because it makes you kind of ask then, do I actually have to eat meat then? Like,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
if I'm eating something that I like, but it's not meat, you're like, then maybe I don't actually have to have it at all.
Exactly, exactly. And it just makes me think about this restaurant that's here in Atlanta. It's on Buford Highway, which is sort of like a mecca of ethnic cuisine. And this restaurant is actually a vegan Chinese,
Oh, wow.
and I tried oh my goodness, just I'm like, wow. And the same names that you would find, on a Chinese food menu, it was the same, but everything was tofu.
Oh,
And
well,
it was a very interesting food experience.
I feel like everybody is learning to cook tofu well because when I was young in the 80s, I remember tofu being cooked and it wasn't so good. It was like people didn't know what to do with it. So it was tasted like tofu still. But I just talked to a few weeks back, I talked to one of Medium's writers, Melissa Matthews, and she had a recipe for tofu that made me drool. Like I was
Mm,
like, I want to eat this. This sounds really good. And I think that a lot of people over the years, if you do it enough, you learn the techniques and the knack for doing it.
mhm. Uh, that also makes me think about a another one of my articles that's on Medium about cooking tofu, which actually I just started cooking because I had not really like learned like the proper technique. So I wasn't really like all that interested. I'm like, I had it before and it wasn't like that good.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I never ventured into, trying to perfect it. And my youngest son, who loves Asian foods, he's like, "Oh, mom, you should, start cooking, tofu." And so what happened was I went out and I found the recipe from Mark Bittman,
Yeah.
who's
Yeah.
on Medium, and his recipe called for actually freezing the tofu first, then boiling it for 15 minutes. And so I also
Right.
found a recipe from this restaurant that's based in upper state New York called Moosewood.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they had a recipe for baked tofu. And so what I did was I actually combined both techniques. So anytime I prepare tofu, I freeze it, I boil it for 15 minutes first, and then I coat it with, olive oil and my seasonings, and then I bake it in order for it to become crispy. And that's the only recipe that I use for tofu now.
Yeah. I think everybody has experiences with something where they have it bad once and they decide that that's never going to be good again.
Exactly,
Like
exactly.
I know people that have had okra, and I'm like, well, tell me what you didn't like about it. And they go, it was slimy. I'm like, well, the person who was cooking it probably didn't know what they're doing, because I've had it many times and it was never slimy. I don't get where people get it, but I'm like, how was it prepared? They go, it was just boiled in water. And I'm like, well, there you go. That probably is
Mm-hmm.
why, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what produces the slime in it. But people just get a bad idea about things and then it sticks with them. But then they have it in a restaurant and somebody prepares it well, and they're like, oh my God, where's this been all my life?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I was going to ask you one last question, and I hope this is a fun one. If you could invite 10 people, living or dead, famous or not, to a dinner party, who would you invite and what would you serve?
Only 10?
Yeah, up to 10. Yeah.
um, well, the first two definitely would be my mother and my grandmother. Um, Probably a few of my ancestors who may have had the duties of being a cook, because that would be interesting to be able to, hear their stories. I would love to have Toni Morrison, Maya Angelou,
Oh, yeah.
James Baldwin. Wow, that would be, oh boy, that would be a nice dinner
Yeah.
party. The meal would probably be all of the foods that I prepare now that put a smile on my family's face. Number one is my mother's recipe for potato salad. Is definitely number one. It definitely would be a mix of cuisines, because I don't just like Southern foods or American foods. I would say my other favorite cuisine is Mediterranean. I could
Mm,
eat Mediterranean food every day. So a Mediterranean grain bowl with, maybe brown rice, black olives. Um, let's see. My family loves my lasagna, which I make with ground turkey, spinach, other vegetables. I mean, I could just go on and on. There's just like so many. And probably the dessert would be my butternut squash pie that I make
mm,
every year around Thanksgiving, which
nice.
my family loves, with a scoop of vanilla ice cream or butter pecan ice cream
Nice.
on top.
That sounds delicious. I would be there.
Now I'm hungry. I haven't had lunch yet.
Yeah, you made me hungry too. That lasagna sounds good too. Well, Patricia, I want to thank you for being on the show. I really enjoy getting a chance to talk to you.
Dean, it was wonderful. We definitely have to do this again.
Thank you for listening to my conversation with Patricia Joseph. As I said earlier, I was really happy to get a chance to talk to her, and I would love to have her on the show again, either one-on-one or get to talk to her in a panel of different Medium authors. Please tune in next week. We're going to have author Carl Beckstrand, who is also a publisher, on the show to talk about his children's cookbooks. Until then, happy cooking.